where we are in the Lower East Side, and we have an amazing panel here. Almost all of them has sort of worked in this neighborhood in various capacities, and visitors from the UK actually also are doing something this week in the Lower East Side. So, but the rest of the panelists are local and in New York, and a lot of them do a lot of amazing work. So just want to thank everyone for coming. So the panel, it will be a short sort of panel discussion followed by Q&A from the audience. And without further ado, I would sort of introduce everyone in the panel. We have Claire and Ilyse who has been doing a lot of amazing work with a local community garden, activating from a vacant lot. If you pronounce it wrong.
Siempre Verde.
Verde. So coming out from them, so great. And then we have Vikki from East Street Art. They have been coming over from the UK, and so is Owen from Testing Space. We have Silva from First Street Green Park. An amazing sort of was a vacant park and plaza, a vacant lot that was converted into a cultural asset for the community. And then we have Tamara Greenfield from 4 Thoughts Block doing a lot of amazing community work. We have, sorry, out of breath here. We have Naomi from No Longer Empty doing a lot of work at vacant storefronts. We have Dan from the Lowline. Don't need to explain further. And we have Ed from this online and sort of locally based blog and magazine that is, really tackling a lot of issues in the neighborhood. We also have our co-moderator Lishan with me tonight, and I think this panel is going to be very informal. And I think to start off with, maybe we'll just have you sort of talk about very briefly sort of your work and sort of how you have introduce yourself in your way, and sort of talk about the spaces that you've been working at, and just so that everyone knows, I know a lot about what you guys do, but for the audience, we will just go around the panel. Yeah, yes, please.
So I'm Claire. This is Ilyse.
Hi.
We came together to an organisation called 596 Acres that connected us and connected other people in our community. And our aim at the time was to convert 3 empty lots into a garden. And it really was, our aim was to protect it from developers. And at the time, we had no idea how to do something like this. And it has been an amazing, incredible journey. And the outreaching that has happened has really, really spread far and vast, and the enthusiasm and just like the energy and all the things that we've done and that has happened from it have really been incredible. That's really it, I think.
Yeah, I'd just like to say we haven't planted any actual plants yet, but we have grown a whole community around the garden. It's just a core group of people first made contact to protect the land and to gain legal access to it, and then a few more people got attracted to the space, and by the time we had our 1-year anniversary celebration a few weeks ago, it was a large group of people came in who really represented the Lower East Side across generations and cultures. So we've grown community in our garden.
Where's the space?
It's on Stanton Street and Attorney, right up, one lot on either side.
Hi, I'm Vikki. I'm from a charity from the UK called East Street Arts. And we were founded in Leeds in 1993 by John Wakeman and Karen Watson. And we actually provide, we're a membership organisation, and we provide space and create space for artists to develop. Neil is one of our members, and we've come over here from the UK to put on a pop-up art exhibition, because in the UK I manage our Temporary Spaces project, where we do a lot of pop-up art exhibitions, and we also use space as studios as well. Similar to Made in the Lower East Side, we're more kind of enabling artists to realise their kind of creative ideas. So I'll pass on to Neil.
Yeah, my name's Neil. I run Test Space. We're a creative agency. We make use of temporary and unusual spaces across the UK. So we've done pop-up restaurants, exhibitions, design festivals, live art events. We've made use of shipping containers, old offices, lighting shops, furniture shops, and different and unusual spaces, working predominantly artists, street artists and illustrators.
Hi, my name is Silva. Since 2008, my partner and I have been working on reanimating what's sort of was perceived as a vacant lot. It's actually public parks-owned land that was closed off for many years. We teamed up with First Street residents, and we formed a group called First Street Green that today acts as an open art space. It's a cultural park. It's a paved park. It's not a green park. We work with local communities, artists, designers, architects, community groups, art institutions, and bring them to our site to program the site and to keep the site active.
Hi, I'm Tamara. I direct Fourth Arts Block, or FAB NYC. Fourth Arts Block was founded by arts and cultural organizations who had been homesteading buildings on East 4th Street between Bowery and 2nd, mostly theaters. And they were in those buildings for 30 years on month-to-month leases. Eventually were able to come together and convince the city to sell them their buildings for $1 each and protect them for nonprofit arts use in perpetuity. So it's not really a storefront project, but we look at space in a lot of different creative ways, especially because many of the groups are not always in the space that they're supposed to be in. Things are in construction, there's transitional things. So we've tried to look at scaffolding bridges as art spaces, construction containers. We also had a cafe space that didn't work out, so we were one incubator or kind of a pilot site for miLES over the last 6 months or so. And we do street festivals, so we kind of transform the street itself into a public art space and a community gathering environment. So there's lots of other ways that we try to partner with groups in the neighborhood in that way.
Hi, my name is Naomi Hersson-Ringskog. I'm director of No Longer Empty. At No Longer Empty, we see empty as an opportunity, and what we do is we take empty storefronts and or buildings and turn them into site-specific curated exhibitions featuring both established and emerging artists. In addition, we try to activate the site, really spur some cultural tourism and engagement by hosting a whole roster of educational and cultural events. And in 2011, we were in the Lower East Side on Ludlow and Houston, and we worked together with Fourth Arts Block in staging a community-wide initiative called Art in Empty Spaces. We are very driven to measure the impact and the legacy that transforming these empty sites can bring.
Thanks Eric and Lishan for putting this amazing panel together. I think it's amazing we're here in Parkside Lounge as a TEDx event. This is really fun. My name is Dan Barasch, and I'm the co-founder of the Lowline, which is an effort to build the world's first underground park in an abandoned former trolley station on the Lower East Side, just a few blocks away from where we are right now. And at the core of the idea is the integration of solar technology that can illuminate the underground and allow plants and trees to grow. So I'll tell more about that as we get into it.
My name is Ed. I'm from the Lowdown. I'm here with my partner, Traven Rice, who's right over there. Our website was founded in 2009, and we started a magazine in May of last year, and we cover all of these people and all the cool things that they're doing, and we're just all about community engagement, and sort of organically we end up covering a lot of public space issues, and so we're happy to be here.
All right, well, thanks to all the panelists for introducing themselves and a little bit about their work. I just wanted to kind of kick it off with kind of a general question for whoever wants to take it. Sort of two of the key words and the themes of this panel are space and community. So it's almost this sort of chicken or egg kind of question, right? So is it sort of create the space, design the space, and they will come, or is it that you already have a community of people, whether it's people who care about gardens or art or an underground park, and then you sort of find the space for that people, or does it not matter? Does it go both ways? And what is that connection between a community and a space? Because we use those words, but how does like a space become like a community space and not just a place that's designed or pretty or has art in it?
I think it's really about relationships, and you could definitely have a space and not have a community around that space, and you could also have a community and not have a space. But I think that the two pieces together can create an incredible network and connection in ways that isolated they may not develop the same way. But it definitely, I've seen people develop spaces in ways that don't build community, except maybe in opposition to what's happening in that space. But it's really about what is the intention, what's the opportunity for participation, who's got control, how are power issues being played out in that space. Do people feel invited? Do they feel like they have some ability to influence and control? And I think, there's a nice range of projects here where there's a lot of different kinds of people who came together to make those spaces into something that would be a community asset.
It's very similar to Tamara's comments. It happens. Doesn't happen with one person deciding to do something, and it's usually, sometimes it's a result of something. So in our case, the lot was vacant and it was rat infested, so there was a need to fix it, and the need, it was actually much more direct than that, in the sense that the buildings around that area were getting violations from the health department because of the infestation, so they had to legally kind of fix the problem, which led to an idea of saying, okay, Parks Department doesn't have money. If we pull our efforts together, can we turn it into a cultural space? And then it goes from there.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of kind of practical issues, like you're saying, kind of if the space is empty and it needs something doing to it, that tends to be, certainly for what we do, that's how we end up with spaces. And we don't kind of go in and think it's a community project. It tends to be a kind of, that's where the space is available. You go in, you do something, you have to engage with the local community, but it's not a kind of, you're kind of thinking, yes, we must kind of, it just kind of happens kind of naturally. It's happened when we're doing the show at the moment on Delancey Street, just by kind of opening the space up, you get people just walking by asking, what is this space? And people haven't kind of necessarily seen that space before or seen it used in that way. So that's how we can approach it, less kind of, like community driven, you just end up in the space.
So I wonder if this panel is a little bit self-selecting in terms of the way we answer your question, because an interesting question is when you look at an empty space or something that had been undiscovered or underused, a lot of thoughts can cross your mind. You can say, wow, I think a bunch of condos should be there. Or you can say that'd be a great place for parking, or that's fine as it is. I think some people look at abandoned spaces and see possibilities for what I think cities need the most, which is more public space and opportunities for communities to really spend time together in a communal way. And I know, I presume from what everybody's trying to do on this panel that there's a lot of that sentiment, and that's certainly the way that I feel, and I think our team feels in our experience, which was finding an exciting space that was just really interesting and magical, and then immediately setting out to say how could this be preserved for public use and some kind of public amenity.
I think a few of us here are dealing with creating public space on public land, and there's kind of a particular aspect to that because, as Claire mentioned, when we first came together, it was because of a 596acres.org sign on the fence, and it said there's land if you want it. And that's a group that has established kind of a template for how to look through the fence at a rat-infested, rubble-filled lot and pull community together first. Like going back to your chicken and egg question, they have a template set out, and the first thing they suggest you do is to reach out to your neighbors and get people to come from the block or the immediate area so you can all talk about what you might want to do with this space. And when you start out from that premise, we ended up with a real sense of ownership, I believe, among the people who chose to get involved. Because it's city-owned land, that means it's our land. And reaching back to prior experience, working with a good friend of mine on a project, what we ended up doing was creating a platform rather than a built environment into which people walk and that's predetermined for them what it is and what they'll be doing there. It's an open space, and we all thought we were going to garden this year. And we actually finally put up some planters and filled them with earth last week. But what ended up happening was, meanwhile, we started doing workshops and music events and got art painted on the walls and discovered that that's what really galvanized a larger community to come in. So it became, now even the people who started off saying we want 18 planters and we're going to grow vegetables are saying, maybe we can put our planters off to the side so we can keep a nice open space for community events. So again, I think the magic ingredient from everything I've heard is presenting a platform that's open to community input.
Well, can I just say, taking over empty spaces, there's a whole spectrum of different types of organizations that do that, or individual artists or other retailers. So not everybody is actually interested in creating a community space. It's what Tamara mentioned, which is intention of the people that are actually initiating the project. And the way No Longer Empty sees community, it's very, it's like concentric circles that you have different degrees of really tight-knit community and those that are sort of on the periphery that you might want to bring more into the center. So it's not so black and white.
That's interesting. I mean, I think it really touches upon like what is hyperlocal and also your knowledge of the neighborhood. Like, a lot of you actually have been in this neighborhood for a long time, and I think having that knowledge, I guess I want to throw that out. Is that a prerequisite of making a community space? As Naomi's saying, there's different levels of engagement. Could someone from the outside who, say just moved to the Lower East Side, what about that community? Like, I just want to throw that out, just as a discussion.
I'm completely naive to all of this. Like, I'm a real blow-in, and there was it not only with Irish accent and everything, but to even the process of being a part of the Lower East Side and making a community here, or being, getting in touch with it, and who are the people I need to be connected with and have relationships in order for things like this to happen. And Ilyse, you have so much experience, I feel, which I've tapped into for making these kind of things happen. But when I say naively, I was naive. I just knocked on every door, every poster, just scrambling at anything I could touch that would make it work, So it has been really, really interesting, but it goes back to that question, do you need to have this history in order to feel a part of it? And I actually don't think you do. What you need is that the enthusiasm and the want and, what's the intention for it?
I just want to clarify something I said earlier. I was speaking specifically to permanent status occupying public land, which we're perhaps, you're also in that space on First Park. And I think it's great what groups do when they have a temporary environment and it is more of a process of curating something and presenting it. So I was speaking specifically, just want to make that clear, to the fact that we got the license to access public land, which is owned by the whole community. So there might also be underlying issues of ownership that shape what can happen.
that's right. I mean, there are two kinds of, I guess maybe probably more than two, but different kinds of occupying spaces. Similar to yours, it's about one particular space, and it's not different spaces at any time. In this case, what's happened with us with First Street Green and kind of using First Park, we've kind of become. It's difficult when you get to public spaces. I think difficult for people to know where to go or how to get a permit, who they should talk to, and can they do it, can they not do it. So in a sense, it's public land, but when you have to deal with an authority, it ceases to be public in a sense, or it may not feel public. So somehow the idea of public is that it's free and it's accessible, but there is no such thing. But I mean, the land can be owned by either the government, municipality, in this case, Parks Department. So in a sense, our group has become the sort of the in-between Parks Department and groups who want to use the space. So we are curating the space to some degree, but really we're just facilitating to have it be open and used. So sometimes that's, yeah.
I was also just going to say in response, I think I don't know that you have to have been a long time part of a community to create community space, but there is an approach and a respect for what does exist in a community that I think is really important. And certainly in the arts world, there can often be a perception that the arts are kind of the start of gentrification, or and artists don't help our case very much by saying, oh, I came into the neighborhood and there was nothing there when I got there, and now it's all amazing. Because when people use that language, the people who were there don't feel very respected or honored or recognized for what they are bringing to the community. And so I think a big part of how you build community as either an outsider, insider, wherever you fit, and every community can have an enormous spectrum of what that looks like. It's really about how do you recognize and include people in a dialogue that's actually, and often a part of the arts is that you can, and other kinds of community spaces, is that you can become a place of connection and integration across different parts of communities that may not have interacted previously. And I think that's a really powerful way to do it, but it has to be very intentional and deliberate.
I think that's a really good point. I was about to say that I think that a lot of you in your own ways have been very inclusive in the way that you've reached out to the various communities in the neighborhood. And I was just thinking about the sukkah that is on your space right now, and the Lowline has certainly made huge efforts to reach out to all kinds of different communities in the neighborhood, and it's probably true of everyone. And when we first started, as somebody who's a long-time neighborhood person, and we were not long-time neighborhood people, said to me, I welcome new people with open arms. Is what the Lower East Side has always been about. I just want you to respect what's been here before you were here. And so I think that's a big lesson.
So it sounds like there's some themes about participation and engaging existing publics and just sort of respect. So I guess I kind of want to push it a little bit further and use that sort of bad word of politics, right? Not necessarily like partisan politics, but just this idea of having a point of view or sort of a vision of how you do things. And even sort of different agendas, whether your agenda is different from a developer's agenda or a city planner's agenda, and sort of what is the role of that, of politics, and like how do you address that, even though you sort of talk about community, which is very inclusive in some ways, but sometimes there is sort of opposition, whether it's ideological or political. So how do you deal with that, and how do you address that?
Well, I'm going to give sort of the contrast, and then I'm eager to hear what everybody else says, because what's really interesting with the interim use model that No Longer Empty does is that we're temporarily in a neighborhood, ranging from 3 months to 9 months. And it's been very eye-opening for me, at least, because when we go out and we introduce ourselves and let people know what's going on, and we do our cultural and educational programming in collaboration with local organizations, those that choose to do it, they're not threatened. And I think that is a very important feature of something that is temporary, that it doesn't seem like a threat or an impediment to a developer or planner, city planners. So, for those exploring different options, I mean, that's something to sort of take note.
Well, yeah, because we operate in pretty much the same way as No Longer Empty, so we might be there for 2 weeks, we might be there for 3 months. So each area and each location has its own kind of set of rules, set of politics, and you have to kind of speak to people, speak to other arts organisations, and quite quickly figure out the kind of politics of an area. And don't try and go in and try and take stuff over. Just be very open, be very kind of friendly, explain what you're trying to do. Like you say, being temporary is very different to kind of getting into kind of trying to find a permanent space, kind of getting into long-term arguments with councils or landlords. And it's a hard way to do it, but it has its own benefits.
Yeah, I'll mirror that as well. And we take on spaces and we go and talk to the local community and the local arts community to see what the needs are, whether it's studio space or showing space. And I'd agree that it is only on a temporary basis, but they're really good opportunities for people in the community who have ideas, who want to test those ideas out. And it's great to be based there so you can talk to local people and see what the local politics is. And then if you have a good business plan or a good model, you can then take that on and maybe find a permanent space and just kind of grow from there, really.
I think I would just add to this that I think people who are in the business of trying to create new public space have something that is a real opportunity to people in the political sphere. So thinking about how to position this in a way that can help people at the city or the state or the federal level who are governing, who have constituencies. There's a narrative in which the project becomes something that will provide a hero opportunity for the elected officials and really deliver something that the constituencies will want. So it'd be different if we were coming in with a sort of a harsher lobbying type of message, but if the message is essentially that we want to create community-oriented space for people who live in and around the area and want to open up potential new opportunities for the arts and for economic opportunity, generally that's a message that I would hope that most elected officials would be amenable to, and that's really, I think. And then just to echo, it's a lot of doors to knock on. It's really essential to actually be there, to actually meet people face to face, and to know who those elected officials are, who the teams are that are deciders within each of those offices. And it's a lot of work, but it's kind of essential to actually get their support.
I remember one time hearing an elected official say that he did not have a relationship to someone until they asked him for a favor or asked him for something. And I think a lot of the time people in communities and artists and lots of other, I guess just if you're not already doing that work, you feel uncomfortable asking elected officials for things. But it's you have to be at the table. You have to be in the game, or else, and that's how you deal with politics, is that you're part of the conversation. Otherwise, the conversation's going to happen, and you may or may not be there in the room when it's happening. Often you're not in the room when it's happening, but if you at least have enough people who are trying to advocate for something, or they have a perspective, or they've shown some value, then you can push your way into the conversation if you have to, or you'll be invited to be part of the conversation depending on how controversial it is. But I think it is really on all of us who care about that kind of thing to be part of those, pay attention, keep your eye on things, which is why, I love 596 acres model, which is, here's the space, it's empty. You could have, here's all these different ways that you could find out who owns it and that you actually have you could have an influence on it.
So I think I want to touch on a little bit on, the flip side of politics is also kind of how, and we talked about this a little bit, like how some organizations go into a neighborhood, do it on a temporary basis, and create collaborations and partnerships and work with local community. I kind of want to sort of throw that out there for the group. How important is collaboration? What kind of collaborations and partnerships? How does it help you sort of negotiate? How does it help you to sort of get to what your agenda is, and just want to sort of talk through that process a little bit of, how did you get community buy-in? For example, groups that sort of come into a temporary basis, people might not know about you, coming from somewhere else. How did you engage that? And people that are within the neighborhood, I'm sure there's a lot of politics there to deal with. How did you leverage collaborations and partnerships to sort of negotiate or navigate sort of those conditions?
I think collaboration is absolutely crucial. The show we're doing at the moment on Delancey Street, we've been here 3 weeks, the show's been open about a week now, so within those 2 weeks, we knew Eric when we first got here, but then it's a matter of meeting people and literally knocking on doors, going to artist studios, meeting landlords, looking at spaces, speaking to other people, and you can't do it on your own. It's impossible to do it on your own. So kind of assume you can go in and you can change. You're the kind of outsider, and you've got to go in and meet as many people as possible and speak to people who do the listings. This is all kind of practical stuff, but also within the local kind of community and next door neighbours, who's next to you, who runs a cafe next door. All those they're all kind of key kind of collaborations. They're people who come to the openings, they're people who kind of come by and ask what you're doing. So collaboration it's impossible to do anything without collaborating.
I don't know if there's any mythical being, any mythical person or creature that has 3 heads, but I would say our collaboration looked in 3 directions. First and foremost was 2 neighbors just walking past who had walked past these rubble lots with literally thousands of rats that had been completely neglected and unused for years and years. And we did the old-fashioned grassroots petitions on a clipboard. And talked to people about, how we wanted to get legal access, and we hope they're a part of it. We got hundreds of signatures. The second head was facing in the direction of the people who, as has been mentioned, to respect people who have been around for a long time. If you talk to people who have been in a neighborhood for 25, 30, 35, 40 years, guess what? They know who sits on the community board. They know who sits on which committee of the community board, or they know someone downtown in the particular city agency that you need to talk to. So making connections to, let's say, the elders of the community who have navigated this stuff before is very important. And then the third direction that we looked in was to the community board and the local politicians themselves, and learning how to navigate that process and knowing not just political organizations, but also, for example, the Citizens Committee for New York City gave us a nice grant, looking to not be afraid to look outside the neighborhood as well. But this last aspect of reaching out to political processes and NPOs that might help us, it's a dual process of learning when to go to them with something and also when to fly under the radar and just get some stuff done.
I'd love to add, I love that, and just to add to that, and something else is, I had a former boss who gave me some really good advice, which is that the first rule of networks is that you build them before you know what they're for. And what I think is actually kind of amazing about real networks, as opposed to going to some networking event and shaking someone's hand and saying, "Hi, I want to talk to you about my agenda," is that like real networks come from authentic places where you're actually talking to somebody out of mutual interest and out of a shared sense of vision. And I think that part of it is just actually doing your homework. I mean, you can't really do anything without knowing who the players are and understanding what's happening in the area. But then it's also just, you should have an authentic reason for talking to people. and the relationship should be built on something other than a quick conversation that's transactional. So then when you have those relationships in place, it becomes a lot easier to find the right moment in time to engage them on something, to ask for favors when you need it, and to know who in your network can help you at different stages of the process. So I think thinking about sort of collaboration and partnership is hopefully something that happens in an organic way over time, and by simply knowing who to talk to, and also by building relationships with people who you actually care about.
So this is the last moderator question before we go to the audience, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more about funding and business models, because it sounds like crafting these community spaces is a form of entrepreneurship, even if it's sort of nonprofit or for on city-owned land. And I know that Dan and Lowline was very successful on Kickstarter, and other groups have different models of raising money or getting support. So can you talk about some of your models or different models that you've explored?
I'll say that, No Longer Empty is a 501c3. I think we're quite traditional in terms of it's a free exhibition. Most of the programs are free. So we're really getting our funding from grants, from individual donations, from sponsorship, from in-kind favors. And for the model, we don't, it's an exchange between the property owner and the organization that we are respecting their property, using it professionally, and they in turn give it for a temporary time free of charge. So
Yeah, we also are a nonprofit with, and pretty much try every strategy that there is to raise money. But I would just put in a call for that, because you guys use the term hyperlocal. That if people are entering other communities and you are relying heavily on hyperlocal community-based organizations, to really think about what kind of capacity and time they're putting in, and if there is a grant being raised for that project, to think about honoring a little bit of their time in that process, because I've seen that happen a lot, particularly in communities like, I know groups in the South Bronx or other places where they'll get pulled in on lots of different projects that other people are getting big grants for to go to the South Bronx to do, and then they don't get any money for giving them all the relationships and networks. And so I think there is kind of an inequity right now in the way that the role of the intermediary of the community-based organization is recognized as a group that's really providing a lot of value for other groups. So I think that is something that we should be talking about and thinking about in communities.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. We all try to get grants and so on. It's the same with us. We're not quite a 501c3 yet. We had a Kickstarter grant from BMW that goes back to the BMW Guggenheim lab that we came to First Park in 2011, largely through our communication with Parks that we started in 2008. When BMW Guggenheim lab went to Parks looking for a spot to place their lab, Parks connected them with us, and we negotiated and basically got them to remediate the site, which would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's no way we would have gotten that money. And in return, we hosted the lab there. And when they were leaving, BMW itself gave us a seed money to continue kind of the lab's mission, although I think the lab's understanding of local versus our understanding of local is quite different. I mean, for them, there's local and global. For us, there's micro-local and macro-local. Yeah. And micro-local goes as far as, thinking about the Parks Department, guy who's going to open the lock gates or close it. I mean, that's our involvement on that level. So as far as so right now, kind of going forward, what we've been thinking of, we've taken our kind of idea of micro-local, macro-local, kind of translated it to what we call vertical and horizontal users. So the vertical users are kind of larger institutions that we may be able to attract. And the horizontal users are really more of the community-based groups, or it could be anybody on the street. And I think that intersection of vertical and horizontal can kind of have the vertical benefit the horizontal to some degree. That's going to be our experiment anyway.
I was just going to say, as a not-for-profit in the UK, it's a very similar kind of thing to what you were saying. No longer empty, like 2/3 of our organisation is grant funded, but then the other third is private income as well. So we try and diversify as much as we can. A small percentage of that is from earned income from our studios, but the project that I work on is actually self-funding, and it also goes back to the organisation. Through us being in a space, we save the landlord a considerable amount of money by being there, because they have to pay taxes on having an empty property. So we ask for a donation back to our organisation to cover the costs of the projects, and that goes into the projects in the specific spaces and also our projects as a whole as an organisation. So I think it is about kind of trying to diversify.
Your tax policy refunds them. It doesn't charge them while you're there.
Yeah, that's the case. When an occupier is in a premises, then it falls to the occupier, but it's an incentive so landlords don't sit on empty properties, basically.
Yes. We don't have that here.
Yeah, I found that out. I was trying to find out how it works for not-for-profits over here, so I'm quite interested
That would be
in that.
great.
As a community garden, it's pretty much part of our license that we're all volunteers, none of us gets paid, so our funding model has been mostly, I would say, 85% sweat, and very little equity. But just one little anecdote I wanted to relate is that on June 21st we were a Make Music New York location. And we thought, oh, we can do like a bake sale and have lemonade and do like some fundraising. We'll have a table out front, and we had lots of baked goods and jugs of lemonade and some harder stuff under the table. And we got there and we were like, oh, what price should we set on things? Okay, $2 for lemonade. And we got about that far when the first little kid ran up and said, I'm thirsty, can I have one? Because we're right next to a playground, and I just looked at the kid and I just couldn't bring myself to say $2. So we just gave away the food and the lemonade, and we put a big empty vinegar jug on the fence. It's like, eat what you want, donate what you can, and we made $200 in a few hours, but what was more important than that was that we broke bread with the community, and we didn't put a price on what we were doing, and so we actually count our riches in different ways. I mean, our monetary needs are very low, and so I think we're maybe unusual in that regard.
Just have 1 year of time. Yeah, that was an amazing day. But what we have noticed is that loads of people in our communities don't want restaurants and venues where they have to pay to celebrate the moments in their lives, like their graduations, their birthdays, their weddings, etc. And what we have been doing in the garden is we're going to have a wedding there in a few weeks. We just had a graduation graduation party, and we've had a kid's birthday party there. So the fact that people want outdoor space to celebrate the moments in their life, that it is not about like transaction of money, but much more of a spirit of like, this is amazing, I love what you guys are doing, I want to be a part of it, and we're all being a part of it together in a very human way. So, like Ilyse said, it's not money, but it's about the connection of always using the space.
A different kind of capital.
Yes.
I think this isn't directly answering the question, but I think what we see is really that the elephant in the room is the property owners, and they have to have an incentive. I think that a lot of you, in very meaningful ways, are working to persuade property owners that it's in their interest to be community oriented. They don't always see that, and I think that a lot of people in the community right now are trying to figure out how you get at that, how you create those incentives, and I think that's the big question mark right now.
One more thing about funding, or maybe this is to the panelists, but for those that have used Kickstarter, do you feel that it has empowered your community, giving them a little ownership into the project or the mission?
There's only one, I guess.
Okay, so I'll just jump in on this. Yeah, I mean, we were, our story, for those of you who don't sort of know about the Lowline, we were a project where we sort of, put out a couple of images and had some press coverage of the idea, but we had absolutely no money. It was still sort of something that we did on our weekends and at night. And in order to raise some money so we could actually move the project forward and build a version of the Lowline, we set up a Kickstarter campaign with a totally audacious goal of $100,000. And sort of nailed it in a week, which was really exciting. But what mattered, I think, more interestingly to your question, is that I think we still have the most number of people who signed on for an urban design project on Kickstarter. We had 3,300 people who signed on. So here we have this network of people who have signed up, and really, because of having bought into the project with $10 or whatever, now have the extreme benefit of being on our newsletter, and we'll continue to be in touch with them with all kinds of updates and solicitations and engaging them in all the ways that we can. So it was, I think, entirely transformative for us. So I think there's like sort of the pre-Kickstarter and the post-Kickstarter campaign in terms of our evolution, and it put us on the map and gave us a network and a group of people who we knew we could depend upon and go to help us build the vision that we had set out to do.
How many times can you do a Kickstarter? I mean, it's the same pool of people, right? Eventually, do they just keep giving? I mean, how does that really work? I never really understood that.
It's your pool.
It's your pool.
And others.
Yeah.
As far as reaches. But I think for some organizations and entities it does work very well, and you can do it per season. I've seen that happening, and people get excited about, the next season I want to sponsor it.
Right.
So it's just the framing of it. Do you think you'll do it again?
Well, it's under live discussion. Our team is here, and we think about it a lot. I think there are ways that Kickstarter made successful and not successful. I think there are some ingredients that make a Kickstarter campaign successful or not. You need a tangible and exciting project that people can connect to. So raising money for sort of general operations for a park, not that exciting. But if you're building something that's never been done before, that you can really get people behind in a way, because at its base, Kickstarter is really, I think, it's very strong in the arts and creative space. So if you can make it clear that you're building something creative that no one has really done before, it can capture people's imagination. I think that's the right time to go to Kickstarter, and also to have the right kind of price tag that keeps people excited. I mean, interestingly, some of the feedback that we got was that, given where we were with the project and how much momentum we had, that we probably could have even sort of asked for more. In order to build what we built, we actually needed much more money. We were very naive about it, and we needed a lot more money than we raised. But it gave us an important start, and I think it also gave a lot of other kinds of funders the confidence to contribute to us, which is maybe even more important. That there was a sense that here's this fundable organization, which then we could bring to other kinds of maybe more established funders.
I was just going to say also for park projects, there's IOB, which is in Indiegogo, but in our backyard, which is a little more greening and community oriented, and usually has a little bit smaller campaigns. So, and often they also match because they get kind of general grantees, they get general funders who will just give into a pool. So it can be a better match for smaller community-based, and now I guess it's any kind of community or civic, or it doesn't have to be greening. But we have a Kickstarter right now, and we're having a hard time. So I don't know. I think it's, part of it is creating a goal that you can get to, and everybody has kind of different networks, I guess.
What's your Kickstarter campaign for? I'll let you plug it to me.
Oh, thanks. We have a big festival coming next week, so we're calling it Raising a Stage, barn raising. It's a stage raising, so it's just $3,000.
No 100,000.
Well, we have the media here, you know?
That's right.
Oh, put him on the spot.
That's right.
One last question before we go to the audience. I think there's a very, I mean, and that's something that I think miLES always sort of debate upon is sort of the specificity and the scalability of something. So, you know, we want to build something that's very specific to a neighborhood, but at the same time, we want that effort, that, you know, engagement with the community to be scalable, you know, to replicate so that we don't lost in the specifics of, you know, one very specific site, because every site is very specific. You know, like, you know, the UK rules is, I kind of want to just, you know, sort of, and throwing out with that, like, with what is your thought of, you know, kind of, where do you navigate between how do you create sort of that very specific community experience, but at the same time not lost, you know, with knowledge that you have, and how do you scale it, you know, and share it with everyone, and or build a product that could be scalable and people can recognize across, you know, in San Francisco, whoa, I can do that as well somehow, and, you know, and have, and the fact that it's not just hyperlocal but also global. It's a very loaded question, I guess, but it's I just want to because it's more of a statement than a question. But I just wanted to sort of throw it out to sort of see what your thoughts are with sort of that two sort of spectrum.
I'll just say quickly, I've had this conversation a few times with some people, and we've started talking about it as like a community of practice. And not that you know, we're the only people doing that, but and so you're looking at what are the strategies that are approachable and applicable to many different contexts, and what are the specific tactics that you use for that context. So I think building communities of practice, which is, you know, the kind of thing that a lot of groups that are doing it across doing this kind of work, that's what they're doing. It's let me share a lot of the strategies that we're using to approach this kind of work, some core values, and then you can give the specific tactics, which give it the kind of richness and nuance that makes it a valuable experience. But I think it's that balance.
I mean, we've also had these discussions where people, you know, in the beginning when we first we had volunteers in our group, and they were very young and very excited, and they were actually very interested in, you know, thinking of it as a project for all the vacant lots in New York City, and certainly that could happen. In this case, personally, I'm not interested in that, but the way I see it is that, you know, you just hope that somebody else can take that idea and do something better with it. I mean, it doesn't have to be, it depends on what your ultimate desire is. So in our case, it's the interesting shift for my partner and I has been that, I mean, we're both architects, so we're used to building things and we like building things. And when we first came into this project, we had ideas of building some kind of a canopy or having competitions, and we might still do those. But what has happened, you know, as a shift in our thinking is that you don't have to necessarily build. You can build the space, just like you're talking about building a community or building. What was the word that you practice? Yeah. So as opposed to building a building, so that has been very interesting for us as a shift and kind of change.
I was just going to say that we belong to a national organization of independent community news, you know, entities, and the motto is "Local doesn't scale," which I think is actually kind of great, because what we're doing here is specific to our community, and that's the beauty of it. And it's not to say that we can't, there are things that we haven't learned that are applicable to other communities, but what I really love about what we're doing is that it's for this community and not some other community.
Yeah, I think, and it's an amazing and really important resource. And I think actually, just to build on that, I think that good ideas actually spread pretty organically without having to scale them or having to take responsibility for disseminating them across the world. I mean, in some respects, the High Line has definitely inspired projects like ours and like a lot of other projects around the world. There's elevated parks and sort of reclaimed infrastructure in cities all over the world, and that movement's only starting. And since we've gotten our idea out there of reclaiming the underground specifically, a lot of others around the world and around the country have talked to us about, could this kind of intervention be, in Detroit or Atlanta or London or whatever. So I think that as people who are just really busy working on making their dream happen, I think the biggest thing you can do is just to really succeed at what you're trying to do, and I think the scalability will probably come from there.
I'd like to use a gardening allegory. If a daisy grows and its seeds it's pollinated, and it's still just a daisy, but the seeds kind of blow next door in the wind and plant themselves in the next garden. So for someone like Ed with the lowdown, I would say don't underestimate the sphere of influence that you might have, that someone who loves reading, like I do every day, the lowdown, might move to another locale where there's no such community newspaper and uses what you've done as the inspiration and as a template for reproducing it in a new context. And so there's, things that local may not scale, but it really can propagate. And I think, you get the right teenager happens along and asks a few questions and gets interested in what you're doing, and you don't even know where what you've planted might end up, and the ways that it will spread and the shapes that it will take.
I was just going to give an example of that. We had some amazing street artists do one of the murals on the side of the garden. And what happened from that, it went on a completely crazy way. We got Hendrik from Germany to come over and paint on one of the walls, and his work is incredible. So it went from a few local street kids doing what they love doing to this international artist coming over and knocking on our door and saying, I heard about your garden through this mural that I saw being, GoPro'd and put on the web, etc., and just being Instagrammed, and he got in touch with us. So it's just like an interesting way of using local scaling in a very artistic way, but
it was really global meets local.
It really was. It was like the opposite.
What was interesting about Art in Empty Spaces, which we did in 2011 here in the Lower East Side, we had 5 different sites that were empty and that could be repurposed for artistic use. And what we do at No Longer, we're trying to listen and be responding to those, whatever information we're gathering. And what we learned from the different property owners is that some were very comfortable with giving over this space, others were very tentative, and what we did is we responded to that. So we had those that were only open on the weekend, the art exhibition was only open on the weekend, others that you could only walk by and see as a storefront, and others that were fully immersive with lots of programming and so forth. So at No Longer Empty, we sort of see it as a spectrum of intensive use and extensive use. So that is maybe answering, how do you scale a local idea into a different context?
Questions from the audience? Just shout out, I guess.
Okay, I'll try.
Or you can
come
You can come up if you want. I know. I'm fascinated by the difference between the idea of what everybody is doing about how that is intricately connected to the economy of the place that you're doing it, and how dramatic the change has been, even in the past 5 years that we've been doing the lowdown. That's a very, very short time, and this neighborhood clearly is undergoing accelerated change. So, for example, where you're doing, where you've been in the East Village, let's just say, what was this like in the 1980s when the area was abandoned? You couldn't give away literally, the city was setting the buildings on fire because they couldn't keep people around there. And if you wanted to take over a building and you could kind of fix it up, you could have it. Versus now, where, that's completely changing. And I just feel like the approach has strategy of what any of you guys are doing, and even the way that we cover it. It's so fascinating to me that the way that you respond and the way that you attack it is really intricately connected to the economy. And I've been dying to know, because we keep hearing that what you were saying is not the same thing as the States, but in New York City we keep hearing that because of the state of real estate until recently around here, that you couldn't get any renters to come in, you couldn't get people to come in. You were given tax breaks to, if you couldn't get anyone in, and now we keep hearing that there are a lot of, landowners and people that are given tax breaks, and that's why they're not finding renters. Specifically, like staying away from bringing people in, and I just want to know what that situation is.
So on the policy side?
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be me. So in 2010, I started looking into sort of how can we actually take this creative intermuse and scale it up? How can anybody, whether you're running a dog shelter and you need temporary space, how can property owners give up their space? What's their incentive? And at that time, when I met with City Council, the Department of Finance, they had not discussed any kind of tax abatement. I don't know if that is, I haven't looked into it to see if they are getting a tax write-off or how they are getting a tax write-off, how much. With the legislative initiative getting a tax abatement, it was really difficult because what do you base it on? Do you base it on market value? Is it fair for Madison to get a certain tax rate on letting interim use to go in versus down in the financial district? So that's the answer that I have. That I'm not really clear on what the tax write-off is. Maybe someone else on the panel does.
Well, I can tell you there's two parts. One is that you, as a property owner, you can't get a tax write-off for donating your space for use, which you can get in kind. You can get tax write-offs for in-kind donations of other sorts, but you cannot for space for some reason.
But that's the market value. How do you?
But it's, maybe, but what's the market value of lots of things? Of your time, there's a lot of things that could be otherwise. Because I know an arts group that is doing rehearsal in a vacant space in Midtown that's been vacant for 7 years. And they just get a 24-hour access, they can rehearse there anytime. And the property owner's like, we don't even care if you could give us, we don't care, it's just sitting empty, for some reason, it doesn't matter to them that it's sitting, exactly. And then the other thing is that there have been efforts on the longer term use side, because if you're a nonprofit, you don't pay property tax, but if you're a for-profit, you do. So if you're a renter as a nonprofit, you're paying the property tax. So there's been efforts to try to get a tax abatement for property owners that rent to nonprofits so that that same kind of benefit can be made, and it would be an incentive in some high market areas to keep your nonprofit renters in place.
To make it more affordable.
And to make it more affordable, because obviously they're passing the property tax on to the renter.
I'm Leslie. I did a little bit of this kind of work in Boston. I don't know if it's the same in New York, but some big nonprofit institutions, like educational institutions or hospitals, get pilots, which is payments in lieu of taxes. So they're not taxed, but yet they use a lot of city services. So sometimes they have to contribute in other ways. The city asks them to contribute in other ways, and so sometimes I had discussions with property owners about that, about use of their property as a payment in lieu of taxes, contribution.
There's a lot of weird loopholes, and it's like the other one is a lot of big developers get community space benefit agreements, which you may have heard for publicly owned, privately owned public spaces, which have been tracked by the Municipal Art Society. But there's actually also another use, which is less known, which is community spaces. So it's like you can build higher to create a community space, but no one is tracking those. So there's all sorts of spaces that are supposed to be designated for community use that are owned by private people, but nobody's tracking or keeping them accountable for that. So often they're never made available for community use. So there's a lot of little gaps that could be filled in with advocacy, and that's where I think 596 acres has been really amazing about doing that. Is like, hey, we found there's all this, especially in some, Manhattan has less of that now, but in Brooklyn and the Bronx and stuff, there's a lot of publicly owned spaces that are just sitting behind fences that could be used for something else.
Specifically with regard to open land and the changes that have come in this hyperlocal area, if you wanted to start a garden in the late 70s or early 80s, you got some friends together and you got some wheelbarrows and you walked onto a lot and you started picking up bricks with your hands and digging out fire escapes and you made a garden, and that worked for a lot of gardens, like dozens or if not hundreds of local little tiny vest pocket gardens for years and years until the 90s and the Giuliani administration. I think the gardeners, depending on your perspective, perhaps rightfully so, had gained a sense of ownership and permanence of that land because it had become such a part of the fabric of the community. And then we're suddenly told they had to vacate and that everything would be bulldozed. So back in the 90s, there were, Bette Midler came along and saved a lot of gardens, and some other programs stepped in, and a few were bulldozed, but most were preserved. For our garden, having started our garden in the year 2012, was radically different. I mean, we were still picking up bricks by hand, but our two parcels were one of exactly two HPD, city-owned parcels of land left in the Lower East Side. I think south of 96th Street, there's 3 or 4. There were 3 or 4 in all. Not only that, the community board, the land use committee of the community board had already given the nod to a developer who presented some kind of concept to build on the land. That kind of happened simultaneously with the 596 acre sign going up on the fence, so people got really galvanized, And no trespassing. And actually our 1-year anniversary that we had on August 18th, our party was not a celebration of getting legal access to the land, it was a celebration of the day we cut the locks. So there was still some of that renegade spirit of just taking over land that is owned by all of us. But at the same time, we were up against a political process where one arm of the community board had said, sure, develop on it. Just get back to us about those 3 affordable apartments you're going to include. And then we did an end run around that and went to a different committee on the community board who said, sure, you want to improve this disgusting, ugly, rat-ridden land? Go for it. And we ended up getting our license, but it's an interim license. It's a 1-year license, will probably be renewed with no problem. But again, that nod had been given to development, so where it will all end up, we don't know. So in this economy, I think more than ever, in terms of claiming and using public land and preserving it for community use, it's more important than ever to build your community. Because when the day comes that some developer wants to move forward on the land, developers have money and they influence politicians, but what gets politicians in office is votes. So what you try to do is you create a situation where 2,000 people are going to show up at some public hearing and make a lot of noise. And that's going to be, so in terms of, we'll never have the money to buy the influence, but you have to build a whole other kind of capital within this economy if you're interested in hanging on to city property.
Maybe the last question from the audience.
I have a question that's very specific to No Longer Empty. I was wondering whether you have any interest ever in measuring the impact of whatever projects you've done after you have gone, and if there's some mechanism for that, or is that part of your grant process as well?
Yeah, I mean, so our last exhibition was in the Clock Tower in Long Island City, and we have different types of legacies. Let's start with that. And I think what we are trying to do is sort of be intentional about what kind of legacy we want to leave. Is that a physical one? Is that an educational one? A cultural one? It can vary. But for example, what has happened tangibly at the Clock Tower in Long Island City is that we have opened now this formerly empty space that was there empty for 25 years and given it to local community organizations. So LIC Arts Open had their opening there. Uni Project has their residence there as well. Right now, you guys can see a show put up by the Hologram Arts Center. So it's bringing the property owner sort of back to the table and opening that space for public use. It's similar, sort of taking the government land and making it a garden, but this happens to be private property. And so, for example, in Ludlow, when we were here in 2011, that space got leased. We see a space that can be leased after us is much better. Instituting other programs for like NLE Curatorial Lab. I mean, there are many different types of legacies, and yes, we do. It's a longer conversation.
So the clock tower is being leased, or is it?
It's still rotating. But what's nice also about giving to sometimes young collectives or young organizations, it gives them the platform to build audience, to showcase visibility. A lot of things can happen from being active and out there.
That's a really good segue to the next section. Well, thank you for sort of all your amazing comments and your perspective and all the amazing work that you're doing. So right now we're for those of you who don't know, I'm the founder of Made in the Lower East Side. Lishan is also part of Made in the Lower East Side. We open storefronts to possibilities, just like Airbnb for storefronts, but we also incubate small businesses, creatives, and entrepreneurs and civic-minded people to showcase their projects on a short-term basis to activate these vacant lots. We are sort of working towards a social enterprise model, so it's a little bit different from what Naomi is doing. And we're going to show you the Kickstarter video, which just launched yesterday. And we hope this is going to be sort of the launch of our launch party. And hope you guys would be able to pledge. And after you've seen the video, of course. And thank you again, all the panelists.